Stand right here at this dusty, ancient crossroads 2,000 years ago, and you would watch armies, monks and merchants all walking past you. This was once Taxila, a city so strategically vital that 3 separate rival empires fought bitterly for centuries to claim it as their own. Here, Greek philosophers debated beside Indian scholars, while Persian tax officials carefully counted revenue in 3 different languages. Today, it survives only as broken stone and silent courtyards, but once it truly was the beating intellectual heart of the entire ancient world. This is the story of a city that refused to belong permanently to any single civilization, and instead became the meeting place of them all. A place where East and West did not violently clash, but sat together, argued respectfully, learned deeply, and built something entirely new. Picture the scene precisely: dust rising from camel caravans, temple bells ringing faintly, and voices arguing loudly in the crowded streets. Long before Rome ever ruled the wider Mediterranean world, Taxila already stood as a university city, quietly drawing brilliant minds from 3 continents. Kings and empires rose and fell violently around it, yet the classrooms, workshops and monasteries of Taxila somehow always managed to survive. By the time this remarkable story ends, you will finally understand why conquerors kept returning to a city that never even had an army of its own. Let us walk together into Taxila, exactly as it once was, when its ancient streets still echoed with 100 languages and 1,000 competing ideas. Taxila sat precisely where the fertile Indus River plain meets the rugged mountain passes leading directly toward Persia, Afghanistan, and beyond. Every invading army marching into India from the northwest had no choice but to pass through this valley, whether they came for war or trade. That single accident of geography quietly shaped everything Taxila would eventually become, for better and for absolutely devastating worse. Rivers here did not just water crops, they carried boats loaded with grain, timber and pottery, bound for markets scattered across the region. The city rose on a plain, ringed by low hills, close enough to rivers for reliable irrigation and close enough to trade routes for genuine wealth. Caravans loaded heavily with silk, spices, precious gems and sturdy horses moved constantly through streets that had been built centuries before them. Long before any written history properly names it, archaeologists have already found tools here dating back to the very earliest farming settlements. By around 1000 BCE, a real fortified city had emerged here, its mud brick walls carefully guarding granaries, workshops, and small local shrines. Ancient Indian epics even mention Taxila by name, describing it clearly as a place of learning long before any great empires ever arrived nearby. The name itself, meaning roughly "city of cut stone," hints strongly at the skilled masons who patiently shaped its earliest and grandest buildings. Merchants brought far more than simple goods through Taxila's crowded gates. They carried languages, entire religions, and completely new ideas. A humble farmer selling wheat might overhear a trader speaking fluent Aramaic, while a priest nearby chanted ancient verses in classical Sanskrit. This pattern was never an accident of simple location. It was the beginning of something that would define Taxila for a full 1,000 years. Every single civilization that touched this fertile valley left something meaningful behind and quietly took something else home in return. Around 530 BCE, the disciplined armies of Persia's mighty Achaemenid Empire swept eastward and folded Taxila into the largest empire on earth. Even before any empire claimed it formally, Taxila had already become a natural stopping point for travelers moving between distant worlds. Suddenly, this quiet river valley city answered directly to a distant king, ruling from magnificent thrones, 1,000 miles away in Persepolis. Persian governors, formerly called satraps, arrived here to collect tribute, yet they rarely disturbed the city's comfortable daily rhythms at all. Instead, Persian roads, organized postal systems, and careful administrative methods slowly began weaving themselves into everyday local life. Coins bearing distinctive Persian royal symbols mix freely in crowded market stalls, alongside older currencies still trusted by local merchants. Zoroastrian fire temples may well have stood not far away from ancient shrines devoted to entirely different gods, spirits, and local traditions. For nearly 2 full centuries, Taxila steadily absorbed Persian bureaucracy while stubbornly keeping its own distinct culture fully intact. Scribes trained here learned to write using scripts borrowed from Persia, blending them with older regional writing traditions. Persian rule brought heavier taxes, yet it also brought new roads, postal relays, and safer travel that many merchants quietly came to appreciate. The city's overall wealth grew as it became a vital tax and trade post, feeding valuable resources back toward the distant Persian heartland. Yet this entire Persian chapter, however long and prosperous it lasted, was only quietly preparing Taxila for an even more dramatic arrival soon. Far away to the west, a young Macedonian king was already dreaming restlessly of an empire stretching well past the edges of the known world. In 326 BCE, Alexander the Great crossed the Indus River, and Taxila's own ruler made a decision that genuinely shocked his regional rivals. Rather than resist with force, King Ambhi calmly opened the city gates and welcomed the famous conqueror with gifts, war elephants, and alliance. It was a calculated gamble, trading formal submission for reliable protection against Taxila's far more aggressive regional enemies nearby. Alexander marched his utterly exhausted army straight into a city unlike anything most of his hardened Greek soldiers had ever personally witnessed. Here stood temples, bustling marketplaces, and scholars discussing complex philosophy in a language none of the Macedonians could understand. Greek historians traveling with Alexander wrote home describing wandering ascetics who fasted for weeks and debated openly in public squares. These remarkable encounters between Greek philosophy and Indian spiritual thought would keep echoing through history for centuries afterward. Alexander rested his weary troops here for weeks before finally pushing further east, deeper into lands still completely unknown to his vast empire. When illness and mutiny eventually turned his exhausted army back toward home, Taxila quietly remained behind, forever changed by his brief passage. Greek soldiers who stayed behind married local women here, planting the very first seeds of a cultural fusion that would fully flower much later. Alexander died tragically young in distant Babylon, but the cultural door he had kicked open between Greece and India could never fully close again. Ordinary residents watched foreign soldiers march through their streets, wondering whether this strange new king would stay or simply move on. His feuding generals fought bitterly over the fractured empire, and Taxila once again found itself caught precariously between rival ambitions. Out of that lingering chaos, a powerful new dynasty was rising steadily from the Ganges plain, one that would soon swallow this entire valley whole. Chandragupta Maurya, the ambitious founder of India's first great empire, seized Taxila and folded it firmly into growing Mauryan imperial territory. Legend even says the brilliant philosopher Chanakya, his most trusted advisor, had studied and taught right here within Taxila's crowded halls. Under firm Mauryan rule, Taxila became not just another border city, but a genuinely crucial administrative and educational center for the empire. Well-maintained roads connected it directly to the distant imperial capital, allowing officials, soldiers, and eager scholars to move freely. Then came young Ashoka, grandson of Chandragupta, first sent here as a restless prince tasked with governing this difficult frontier province. Chandragupta's new empire stretched further than any Indian kingdom before it, and Taxila now sat proudly near its northwestern frontier edge. Ashoka later became emperor himself, and after one brutally violent war, he embraced Buddhism completely and formally renounced further conquest. His profound personal transformation echoed loudly through Taxila, where new Buddhist monasteries began rising steadily alongside older Hindu temples. Stone edicts carved by Ashoka's direct royal order clearly speak of compassion, religious tolerance, and rejection of needless violence today. Under his generous royal patronage, Buddhist teaching flourished richly here, drawing devoted monks and eager students from across the whole subcontinent. Stupas, rounded stone monuments carefully housing sacred relics, began steadily dotting the low hills surrounding the bustling ancient city center. Monasteries here functioned as far more than simple religious centers. They became genuine libraries, dormitories, and lively centers of scholarly debate. Taxila's already strong reputation for learning now grew explosively under this new wave of generous royal Mauryan patronage and support. Word of the city's gifted teachers spread along busy trade routes, stretching all the way from Persia to the distant ports of southern India. Young men from wealthy and ambitious families across the entire region began traveling here specifically to complete their formal education. This was never a single grand university building, but rather a sprawling network of individual teachers, each specializing in wildly different arts. Some taught medicine here, diagnosing illness and prescribing herbal remedies passed down faithfully through generations of skilled healers. A student's daily routine often began before sunrise, reciting ancient verses aloud until the words settled permanently into disciplined memory. Others taught archery, military strategy, and the demanding martial skills expected of young princes and future battlefield commanders in war. Grammar, law, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy each had dedicated masters here, willing patiently to accept any genuinely promising student. Ancient surviving texts claim students paid their respected teachers not always in coin, but sometimes through many long years of devoted personal service. A determined student might study for 8 full years before a demanding master finally judged them, ready to practice their craft independently. The renowned physician Jivaka, said to have personally treated the Buddha himself, reportedly trained within Taxila's respected medical tradition. Students slept in simple shared quarters, ate modest daily meals, and spent long hours memorizing sacred verses and debating interpretations. There were no grand formal lecture halls like in much later universities. Instead, teaching quietly happened in homes, shaded courtyards and gardens. A teacher's reputation mattered enormously here, since fame alone could draw dozens of eager students from kingdoms hundreds of miles away. Some students arrived here barely literate, while others already carried proud reputations as royal princes or sons of genuinely powerful nobles. Regardless of birth or background, the city's respected teachers were famous specifically for judging students purely on discipline and raw talent. This deeply meritocratic spirit made Taxila legendary long after the very empires that once protected it had already crumbled slowly into dust. Even as the once mighty Mauryan Empire eventually weakened and fractured apart, Taxila's schools quietly continued teaching brand new generations. Political power shifted constantly and violently around the city, yet knowledge itself proved to be far more durable than any single throne. That remarkable resilience would soon be tested again, as descendants of Alexander's own soldiers unexpectedly returned with fresh new ambitions. Centuries after Alexander's brief original passage, scattered Greek kingdoms carved from his fractured empire pushed steadily back into this valley. These so-called Indo-Greek rulers, descended from Macedonian settlers, now spoke local languages fluently and worshipped local gods openly. King Menander, easily one of the most famous Indo-Greek rulers, reportedly embraced Buddhism after engaging in deep and lengthy philosophical debate. His recorded conversations survive today in ancient texts, capturing a curious Greek king questioning Buddhist monks about the very nature of self. Under confident Indo-Greek rule, something truly remarkable happened quietly in the busy workshops and studios scattered across Taxila's streets. Skilled sculptors began carving the Buddha not as a distant abstract symbol, but as a fully human figure wearing flowing, distinctly Greek-style robes. This striking new artistic tradition, formerly called Gandhara art, merged Greek realism with deeply distinct Buddhist spiritual themes and ideas. The Buddha's face gained noticeably Greek proportions, his hair styled in gentle waves, reminiscent of statues carved in distant Mediterranean cities. Craftsmen experimented constantly, blending unfamiliar foreign styles with familiar local materials until something wholly original emerged. Coins minted here proudly bore Greek gods stamped on one face, and Indian deities or sacred symbols carefully stamped onto the opposite reverse side. Grand temples combined elegant Greek columns with traditional Buddhist stupas, creating a hybrid architecture unlike anything seen on Earth. Greek theatre, Greek coinage systems, and Greek administrative practices blended seamlessly here with much older and established Indian traditions. Yet this cultural exchange was never simple imitation, since local artisans actively reshaped Greek techniques to express purely Indian religious ideas. The resulting visual language proved so influential that its distinctive echoes eventually spread far across Central Asia and well beyond that region. Statues carved patiently in Taxila's busy workshops would go on to inspire Buddhist art from distant Afghanistan all the way to China and Japan. This entire Indo-Greek chapter proved conclusively that Taxila was never simply conquered. It consistently and quietly transformed its own conquerors. But like every single power that came before them, the Indo-Greek kings eventually weakened too, opening space for the next great regional empire. From the distant Central Asian steppes came the Kushans, fierce nomadic warriors who unexpectedly built one of history's most underrated empires. Under confident Kushan rule, Taxila did not decline at all. It actually exploded in size, wealth, and importance along rapidly expanding trade networks. The famous Silk Road, connecting distant China all the way to Rome, now ran directly through Kushan territory, with Taxila serving as a vital hub. Chinese silk, delicate Roman glass, fragrant Indian spices, and sturdy Central Asian horses changed hands daily in Taxila's crowded marketplaces. Kushan Emperor Kanishka, a genuinely devoted patron of Buddhism, poured vast resources into new monasteries and monumental stupas built here. Pilgrims traveled enormous distances just to study quietly or worship devoutly at Taxila's increasingly famous religious institutions and schools. Chinese Buddhist monks wrote detailed first-hand accounts describing thousands of resident monks living peacefully across the city's monasteries. Caravans arriving from the west brought news of Rome, while travelers heading east carried rumors of a vast and mysterious Chinese empire. Busy workshops mass-produced elegant Gandhara-style Buddha statues, steadily exporting this striking fusion art style along distant trade routes eastward. The city itself sprawled across multiple connected settlements, each featuring its own temples, busy markets, and residential neighborhoods. Wealthy merchants built elaborate homes decorated lavishly with imported goods, proudly showing off fortunes made from constant regional trade. Beneath this glittering golden age, however, distant tremors were already quietly building among restless nomadic peoples further north and west. Empires that depended heavily on trade routes, remaining safely open, were always dangerously vulnerable to whoever controlled those distant frontiers. For now, though, Taxila stood proudly at the absolute peak of its wealth, learning, and profound cultural influence across nearly all of Asia. No one casually walking its crowded streets could possibly have imagined how quickly this golden age was truly destined to unravel completely. By the 4th century CE, the once mighty Kushan Empire had weakened considerably, gradually fracturing into smaller, far less stable regional kingdoms. Taxila thrived under these new regional rulers, its ancient reputation for learning still attracting scholars despite growing political uncertainty. Then came ominous warnings from the distant northwest, persistent rumors of fierce nomadic warriors called the Hunas steadily advancing toward India. These devastating Huna invasions, arriving in violent waves through the 5th century, brought destruction unlike anything the city had seen. Chinese pilgrim monks, visiting only slightly earlier, had described a thriving city, its monasteries active, and its streets busy and genuinely prosperous. Just a few decades later, other traveling monks found something entirely different here, only ruins, ash, and monasteries left completely stripped bare. Huna armies reportedly destroyed monasteries systematically, viewing accumulated Buddhist wealth and sacred relics as easy targets for plunder. Monks who had taught here for generations fled towards safer distant regions, carrying precious manuscripts and memories, leaving buildings behind. The great university that had drawn students from Persia all the way to the Ganges gradually fell completely silent, its classrooms finally standing empty. Trade routes shifted southward as cautious merchants sought safer paths elsewhere, slowly starving Taxila of the wealth that had long sustained it. Within a few generations, the city that once rivaled any capital in all of Asia had become largely abandoned, its once proud walls slowly crumbling. Families who had lived here for generations packed what little they could carry, leaving behind homes their ancestors had built centuries earlier. Drifting sand and silt slowly buried quiet courtyards where brilliant philosophers had once debated openly the very nature of existence and self. For well over 1,000 years, Taxila's memory survived mainly in scattered ancient texts, existing as half legend and half completely forgotten history. Then in the 19th century, curious British archaeologists finally began excavating mounds that local farmers had walked past for generations. What they slowly uncovered stunned historians worldwide, an entire lost city, layer upon layer, quietly spanning nearly 2,000 years. Sir John Marshall patiently led decades of careful excavation work, slowly revealing ancient streets, stupas and workshops buried beneath the soil. Thousands of exquisite Gandhara sculptures emerged from the earth, their Greek-influenced faces staring out silently after centuries of darkness. Today, Taxila stands recognized as an official UNESCO World Heritage Site, its precious ruins finally protected rather than carelessly plundered. Visitors now walk along the same ancient streets where Persian officials, Greek soldiers, and devoted Buddhist monks once crossed paths daily. And despite repeated invasion, brutal conquest, and eventual total abandonment, something of Taxila's original spirit clearly survived through it all. The statues its workshops produced visibly influenced Buddhist art from distant Japan to Tibet, carrying that fusion style across many centuries. Modern museums around the world now display Gandhara statues first carved in Taxila, silent witnesses to a conversation between two civilizations. The very idea of a city built proudly around learning rather than conquest still quietly echoes today in universities founded many ages later worldwide. Taxila ultimately teaches us that the greatest empires are not always the ones with the largest armies or thickest defensive walls of stone. Sometimes the most lasting power belongs to the places willing to absorb curious outsiders instead of simply and violently resisting them outright. Every single conqueror who marched through these ancient gates left something behind, and in doing so, unknowingly built something greater still. History never truly disappears completely. It simply waits patiently beneath the sand for someone curious enough to start digging again someday. Consider for a moment everything this valley witnessed: Persian tribute, Greek philosophy, Mauryan compassion, and centuries of relentless trade. Consider the quiet students who walked these same dusty roads seeking knowledge, never realizing they were building something the world remembers. If this journey through a truly forgotten crossroads of ancient civilizations genuinely captivated you, please consider subscribing for even more stories. There are countless other lost cities out there waiting patiently to be walked through, each hiding secrets just as remarkable as Taxila's own story. Tell us honestly in the comments below which forgotten city or crossroads you would love for us to reconstruct next in our future journeys. Until then, always remember that somewhere beneath your own feet, another Taxila might be patiently waiting to be rediscovered someday soon.